how to use layers in Affinity Photo, live effects as well as adjustment layers, and also grouping of layers and positioning of layers. PC or Mac. You can select layers by selecting them on the document itself. So I can click here and select the right or the left, but also I can go to the Layers panel. You can find the Layers panel in the View menu, Studio and Layers. And the order for this, left is on the top and the right is on the bottom. You can change the order, you can move it up or down, and in this video it doesn't really matter. Next thing, I've got the right selected. I can now go over here to a layer and new adjustment layer, and I can use any of these. For purposes of display, I'm going to use gradient map. Main reason, it's very garish. So I'm just going to go for a very garish colour so you can really see it. If I could go for black and white or very subtle colours, it makes it harder to see. And you can see what happens now. I've got this gradient here and I can close the panel at any time. This is a live effect. You can come back to it and modify at any point. If I've closed it, what you can now do, you can see here, you've got the gradient map has been applied above the right. The left there, which is above the gradient map, is totally untouched. Doesn't matter if you've got 20 items there, 20 items here. These items here that are all below the gradient map will be modified. The ones above will not be modified by that gradient map. So I've got that gradient map there. I can move it around. Go to it, just select it, exactly the same as any other layer. Select it, and then you can just drag. You can drag it up and you can drag it above, and you can see as you drag, you get this blue line appearing. You can also see it tries to put it there as well. That's slightly different. I'll show you that in a little while. So just put it to the top. Now it's above all of them. They're all affected. They've all been modified by this gradient map adjustment, or it could be any other adjustment. I can select the gradient map and just drag it down. And as I drag it down, you can see a blue line between the image and the text, and that's for the left. And I can release. That's been moved inside, sort of grouped. It's grouped with the left. It's only applied to the left. Even though this gradient map is above the right one there, it doesn't modify it because it's inside this one. It's like a grouping. Grouping works the same. I'm going to go through that in a sec as well. I can drag it out again. Just drag it up there and you can put it above. And again, it's applied to both. I can do exactly the same as before. I can just drag now. Instead of the left, I can drag it down to the right. You can see that line there again and release. Now it's associated with the right only. So if I go to the right, I can select this layer. I can just drag it above there. So the right is now above the left. It still doesn't make any difference. It's associated only with the right, not the left. And you can do that with any adjustment. And you could have multiple. So I can select the left. So with the left selected, I can go over to the layer and new adjustment layer, gradient map again. Let's just go for gradient map. But this time I'm going to go for a different, and I'm going to delete that one. That stops. So you can see a different colour. Just wanted something so it's a bit different from the other one. And close it. Again, you can change it at any time. Now this one, this gradient map, is above the left. So it's above the left, so it's modifying the left side only. Do exactly the same. Select it and just drag down and you can put it inside that image. And you can see now you've got the left with that one and you've got the right one with that one. And you can then move the order of this and it doesn't make any difference. It will not. Now sometimes if you don't get it exactly right, it will go back again. You notice it just jumped backwards and forwards. You need to make certain you get that blue highlight happening. So you can move them around. You can also use groups. Do much the same as before. It just groups the effect with the layer. So I'm just going to go here and select the gradient map and the left. So both those selected, not the right. So those two are selected. You can go to arrange. Weirdly, Affinity Photos put all the various groupings and other options associated with that in here. So you've got moved, front, aligns, all those sort of things are all in the arrange section, not in the layer section. So arrange, and you can go to group. You can also right click. I'm just going to group, and now it's grouped that left side. And you can see what's happened. Now you've got the group, the left, it's been modified. This gradient map, even though ostensibly it's still above the right, it's not modifying the right. It doesn't see it. It's not going to apply that effect. That gradient map, totally untouched. And you can do the same. You can ungroup again. You can go to the group. So select the group here, arrange and ungroup. There's also other options for moving things out inside, move back, those sort of things. But ungroup. So ungroup, they're ungrouped now. I can select this gradient map and I can select the right. So I've got that one and that one selected. Do the exact same. Arrange and group. Now that one, the right, is being modified. The gradient map is above that one, so you can see that's being modified. The left is untouched. And even if I move the group above, and you can move them, move groups around, just select, and again, make certain you've got that highlight just above, and you can see now it's above. It's still modifying only the right, not the left. Not the left layer, that's untouched. The gradient map is applied to all the layer. You can modify that. You notice here, it's got white, complete white space here. You can fill that with brush strokes, as well as effects, and also gradients. So I'm just going over here to the gradient tool, select that, and by default it'll be using black to white. If I apply it, and you can see there white and black, white to black. It's just filled that masks there. That's all been filled with that gradient. And I can move it around, so I can reposition it, and all of these images, the left and the right, will be modified. Exactly the same as before. I can drag this down. If I drag it down in between the right and the left, now only the left is being modified by that mask. So you can see as I do that, you get that effect. Move it back and forth, or if I want, I can go, let's select that one and that one. So the right and the left, sorry, right and the gradient map are both selected. Arrange and go to group. And now they're grouped. Because the gradient map is below, sometimes weirdly it seems to suddenly decide, you know what, you obviously mean it that way around. So you can, I've found it does occasionally seem to reposition itself, but that time it didn't do that. So now you can see the right has got that gradient map, and now you can go to that gradient map, and at any time you can select the gradient tool and you can modify it. You can see black to white. It's only a grayscale, so it doesn't make no colour involved with this. You can also add live filter effects. I'm going to go for a very basic effect. So layer, down to new live filter layer, and you've got loads and loads to choose from. I'm going to go with blur and motion blur. Could use Gaussian blur, but motion blur is a good one. I can set the value, the radius, I can change it interactively, and you can see as I apply that, what's happened? Nothing. Because what's happening, it's applying the motion blur to the thing that I had selected, the gradient map. Doesn't matter. And that might happen quite a few times. You might, when you apply an effect, you suddenly think, very strange, nothing's happening. Why? I've got the effect there. And it doesn't matter that the motion blur is above the images, the left and the right. Doesn't matter. All it is because it's associated with the gradient map, even though therefore it doesn't do anything particularly. You can select it and you can just drag it. You can anytime select. Now sometimes what happens, it doesn't seem to do it in the way you think it is, should be doing it. And you might find that you have to do it a few times to work backwards and forwards to actually get it in the right position. And very useful for that sometimes is this. You've got options here, move inside and move outside, which gives you a clear command of what's going to happen. So that move will be moved outside the effect. So that motion blur will be moved outside the gradient map. It's sometimes not so clear whether it's inside or not. It's a pity. I wish there was more of a sort of ability to slide it over a bit more to make it more obvious, or a colour scheme that it could be applied. It doesn't do that. Would be great. You can see now the motion blur is above everything. It's modifying everything, the colours, everything is being modified. It's all been stretched like that. Now I can move it down below the gradient map. So let's just move it down. And the result is slightly different. So the gradient map is being applied to the motion blur and this effect. So the order does matter. So if I put it above again, you can see the result is different. So it's not something you think, oh, you know what, doesn't matter. Worth checking out the order. But also you can do exactly the same as before. That motion blur is being applied to the right and the left. You can drag it down and you can put it in between there. So the right, this one, is not being modified by the motion blur. It's below that one, the motion blur is below the right. So the right is untouched by that effect. So you can create combinations of filter effects using that. And you can do the same. You can put the motion blur. If you don't want it to be applied to anything, just put it below all the way. You might want it later. You might not. You can always also hide it. So you just hide it. That's another option. But you can always stick it right at the bottom and it's still there for future use. But it doesn't affect anything. But you can, as before, you can drag it up. And you can see as you drag it up, it highlights again in between the image and the text. And as soon as you do that, that is now associated only with the left side. So you can see the effect. And at any point, you can always go here, the motion blur, double click. And it brings up the panel. And you can turn around and say, oh, I don't want it that blurred. I want it like that. Maybe it's 67. So you can see the effect. Now the gradient map is still above all of them. And it's been applied to all of the layers. I can again drag this down. I'm going to drag that now into the right. So the right has got the adjustment, the gradient map, and the blur is only associated with the left. But you don't have to keep it like that. You can expand them out anytime like that. And you can drag that up here and drag that into there. But again, you can see that highlight there, that blue highlight. So the right now has got the motion blur and the gradient map. So you can move them back, up and down. And you can move it back again if you want. Again, make certain it's highlighted there. And now the motion blur is only on the left side. You can reposition them in many ways. You can also select them, right click, and you can duplicate. So you can create multiple copies. So you've got 2 copies there of motion blur. With that, that motion blur is independent of this one. So you can select it and drag it up there. Make certain it's on that. So it's definitely associated with that right one. It's now included below or inside. It's inside. That's the key thing. It's inside. So the motion blur there is inside there. And you've got that motion blur. They're independent. So you can double click this one, bring up the panel again. And you can turn around and say, oh, I want the rotation to be that way. So you can make the rotation blur up and down. And that one left to right. So a variety of different designs can be created using this approach. As with the gradient map, you can mask this as well. You might not want the effect applied to the entire image. So go with this one, and this is the right. It's the white block, completely empty at the moment. You can go here to the gradient tool or brush strokes and click there and apply. And as you do that, you can see you've got the white there and you've got the black at the bottom. The black is lovely and clear of the effect, and you've got the result with the white area up there. You've got slight blurring as it sort of drifts off, and you can reposition that. You can decide, I want that to be slightly lower, so you've got more of the motion blur like that. And you can also, of course, change the angle as well, or maybe put it from white to black to white. Up to you. And you can, of course, go that so like it's drifting from the bottom. All kinds of things. And you can do exactly the same with this one as well. Go to this motion blur. With that selected, you can apply it and apply another gradient there, and you can see the effect. There, the white, you've got the effect. The black, you haven't got the effect. You can also select all the layers as well as the effects. And then go to Arrange and Group. So you can group them all into a single group and you can expand at any time, and you can see then all your other groupings as well. But I can duplicate this one, so I can right click and I can say duplicate. So duplicate, I've got 2 now. I can resize them. Let's just resize them. Resize that one. And I'm going to say this one, I'm just going to double click, call left group. Otherwise, if you don't rename things, quite often what happens, especially when you're applying multiple, and if you've got like hundreds of layers, it gets too complicated. You start confusing which one you're selecting. I quite often end up thinking, is that the right side of the group, or is that this one? Is that the group with the motion blurs? Obviously, sometimes you can see the effect, but if you've got something that looks exactly the same, it's not particularly clear which one you're selecting. Now you've got the bounding there, but sometimes if you've got like hundreds of layers, it does get quite complicated which one you're selecting. So I've got this. Well, I've got the right group here. I can do exactly the same as before, and I'm going to apply a layer and new live filter layer, and not blur this time. I'm going to go with the distort, and I'm going to go with twirl. I could use any of the others. So twirl, and twirl's an odd one because you have to apply the angle and radius before you actually see anything, and you can move it around and you can see the effect there. I close that, and because it's in the right group, and you can move it out, you can reposition again, you can move it at any time. So if you've got the twirl there and you think, you know what, I want it to be applied to all of them, everything, the left as well as the right. I can drag up there so it's outside. So it's outside that group, outside that group. And now with the twirl there, and again, double click, you can modify it any time. You can move it over there and you can see what's happening. That twirl effect is applied to all of the groups, the left and the right side of the groups. Close that. At any time, you can always just simply select it and just drag it down, and you will see that little highlight between the image and the text. And now it's only associated with that. Double click again, bring that up, change the angle, move it, reposition it, and you can see now when I go over the left, it just disappears. It's not been applied to the left side. Do that. Now if I deselect them, so nothing's selected, and that's the key thing. If you're selecting something, that's what happens. It will put it at that position. Not always. It does seem to have occasionally where it doesn't. But deselect everything and then go to layer, new adjustment layer, gradient map, very garish, so you can see it. You can move this, modify that, and you can see the effect there. So go with that. It's applied to all of the groups. Doesn't matter if they're in the groups or not. Anything below is modified, anything obviously above is not. So I can just select this gradient map and again drag it down just in between the right group and the left group. So now the left group is the only one touched by that gradient map. The right group is untouched. And also what you can do is you can go here and drag it down again, image and text, and you can see it just there, and release. And now it's only applied to the left group, right group, and it's inside its group. So it's not, even if you move it backwards and forwards. So if I select this and then just drag it up, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change. It's within that group. And you can do the exact same as before. You can select that one, arrange and group. And you can see now you've got another group and so on. You can group and create all these different combinations of layers and effects and positions. But as long as they're in groups, as long as they're above within that group, they will affect the entries within that group. If they're outside, you can reposition them. Anything below will be modified. Anything above will not be modified. For this video, I've been going up here, layer, new adjustment layer, as well as live filter layer. You don't have to do that. Anytime, you can always go down here. You've got mask layer, adjustment layer, you've also got layer effects, and also you've got all the live filters. So this one, just click here and you can see the long list of, maybe this time, exposure. Just go for exposure. And you can change the value. And all the images, they will change. the shapes will change because they're all below the exposure adjustment. And I can close it. This time I can just drag it down. So if I drag it down in between the ellipse, the purple ellipse and the red ellipse, you got here the effect is modifying this and this. So if I again double click this, change that, and you can see what happens. The red, which is below the exposure, is being changed as well. So it's a great way of changing shapes as well as images as well. And you can do that and see the effect there. As before, you can always just simply select it and just drag it down, and you can drag it into the ellipse. So now all the images and everything below are untouched. The only thing that's being modified is the ellipse. That red will circle. Obviously it's created as a circle. But again, I can double click it and you can see as I change that, nothing else changes because it's associated with this ellipse only. If I undo that and put it above again, everything's affected other than the one that's above, the purple. But as before, I can select that and that. I can go to Arrange and Group. And now again, if I go to the ellipse, go to their exposure, these associated. So I can double click this one and only that is modified because it's in the group with this shape, and close. Exactly the same with effects. So I go and create an effect. I like to deselect everything. This time I'm going to go over here because you can do it over here, layer, but you can go here. And you've got all the effects. Nice long list. And it is a long list. You can see lighting, shadow, bilateral. I'm going to go with Gaussian blur this time. So Gaussian blur, and I can change the setting, get the panel, there's not much in there, and I can blur the entire thing. Let's push it up to the, well, to the max. To the max, and you can see because the blur is above everything in this image is blurred. As before, I can just drag it down, and now the purple circle is totally untouched. All these ones are still blurred. I can also select that one, drag it down into the group, and again you've got that little sort of highlight between the image and the group name, and release. And you can see the effect there. You've got the blur in the group. However, there is a slight difference in here because you can see it's slightly, this is one of the weird things with this. So you can just drag that down, maybe drag it further down, and you can see now the blur is below the exposure, or you can move it above. Sometimes the way it positions it is slightly odd. So you should be aware of that when you're doing it. So I always like to occasionally, I think, you know what, I'm going to move it down so it does match what I want it to do. So now what's happening, Gaussian blur is above the exposure, it's above the ellipse, and you can see the effect, and it's only applied to the red. If I select that one again and just drag that down, the effect is slightly different. The exposure adjustment is being applied there, and then you've got the blur. So you can see you get this not particularly nice effect there. And you can move it around if you want. So again, I think that blur is a nicer blur, but depends what you want to create. And you can close that group again. So you've got that, that's totally untouched. But if you drag that below, that ellipse, that purple one below, it's still untouched because all the effects are in this group. And this is therefore, and these are all untouched. Well, I hope you found this of interest. Hopefully I haven't confused you too much. I hope I haven't confused myself too much. It's always one thing with these, is when you do it, even now when I try it and I make weird combinations of groups and layers and adjustments, sometimes the result you think, it doesn't seem to work in the way that seems to be logical with this approach. But hopefully this clears up a number of issues and doesn't introduce any new ones. Any questions, please put in the comments below. Always great to hear from you. Thank you much.